Welcome to Michigan's WW1 Centennial News Report for March 2019. The Polar Bears, American North Russian Expeditionary Force, 1918 to 1919. These men were part of the 85th Division who went over to Archangel, Russia and fought against the Bolsheviks and were finally brought home in July of 1919. State Report for March 2019. Visit WW1cc.org/Michigan for the latest events of what's going on with Michigan's WW1 Centennial. To learn more about Michigan's WW1 Centennial or find out about events going on around the state, go to WW1cc.org/Michigan for the latest information on Michigan's WW1 Centennial. One century ago, March 1919. On March 2, 1919, the First Congress of Communists International opens at the Kremlin in Russia. This would later be known as Comintern. On March 3, 1919, the Communist Party in Germany announces a new general strike. On March 11, 1919, the Communist general strike in Germany is crushed. On March 12, 1919, the Austrian National Meeting affirms Anschluss, the incorporation into Germany. Following the end of World War I and the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the newly formed Republic of German Austria attempted to form a union with Germany, but the Treaty of Saint-Germain on September 10, 1919, and the Treaty of Versailles, July 28, 1919, forbade the union and the continued use of the name German Austria, and Austria was stripped of some of its territories, such as the Sudetenland. On March 15, 1919, the American Legion forms in Paris. When the first organizational meeting took place in Paris, March 15 through 17, 1919, about 1,000 officers and enlisted men attended. The meeting, known as the Paris Caucus, adopted a temporary constitution and the name American Legion. It also elected an executive committee and named a subcommittee to organize the veterans at home in the U.S. The Legion held a second organizational meeting in St. Louis, Missouri in May of 1919 to complete its constitution and make plans for a permanent organization. On March 23, 1919, Benito Mussolini, a former World War I Italian veteran, forms a fascist movement in Milan, Italy. March 23, 1919, the 8th Congress of the Russian Communist Party reestablishes a 5-member political bureau which becomes a center of political power in the Soviet Union. Original members are Vladimir Lenin, Leon Trotsky, Joseph Stalin, Lev Kamenev, and Nikolai Krestinsky. March 25, 1919, President Woodrow Wilson's dream of a League of Nations becomes a reality after the League Covenant is adopted at the Peace Conference in Paris. The American North Russian Expeditionary Force, also known as the Polar Bear Expedition, was a contingent of about 5,000 Army troops from the United States that landed in the Russian town of Archangel as part of the Allied intervention in the Russian Civil War. They fought the Red Army in the surrounding region during a period of September 1918 through July 1919. The American North Russian Expeditionary Force, or Polar Bears, were training at Camp Custer in Michigan. They were part of the 339th Infantry Regiment and the 1st Battalion of the 310th Engineer Battalion. They were part of the 85th Division. On July 14th, they sailed for France. They arrived in England, where they had been reassigned and were issued Russian rifles, and then sailed for the Russian port of Archangel. They would be part of the Allied intervention in the Russian Civil War. The polar bears reached the Russian port of Archangel on September 4, 1918, and came under the British command. The British Army had arrived in Archangel on August 2, 1918, and discovered that the Allied war material that they were supposed to be protecting had already been moved up the Dina River by the retreating Bolsheviks. Therefore, when the American troops arrived a month later, they were immediately used for offensive operations to aid in the rescue of the Czech Legion. The British commander sent the 1st Battalion of the 339th Infantry up the Dina River and a 3rd Battalion of the 339th up the Volga Railroad, where they engaged and pushed back the Bolshevik forces for the next 6 weeks. These two fronts that the Allies were pushing on, the Dina River and the Volga Railroad, became hundreds of miles long and extremely narrow, and difficult to supply, maintain, and protect. By the end of October 1918, they were no longer able to maintain the offensive. With the rapid onset of winter, the Allies began to adopt a defensive posture. During this time, the Allied commanders realized that they'd be unable to raise an effective local anti-Bolshevik force. Thus, they gave up the goal of linking with the Czech Legion and settled to hold their gains during the coming winter. During that winter, the Bolshevik army went on the offensive, especially along the Vega River portion of the Dina River front, where they inflicted numerous casualties and caused the Allies to retreat a considerable distance. Following the armistice with Germany on November 11, 1918, family members and friends of the soldiers of the American Expeditionary Force in North Russia began writing letters to newspapers and circulating petitions to the representatives in the U.S. Congress, asking for immediate return of their soldiers from North Russia. In return, the newspapers editorialized for the withdrawal of the soldiers, and their congressmen raised the issue in Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, aware of not only the change in their mission, but also of the armistice on the Western Front and the fact that the port of Archangel was now frozen and closed to shipping, the morale of the American soldiers plummeted. They asked their officers why they were fighting Bolshevik soldiers in Russia and did not receive a clear answer, other than they had to fight to survive and avoid the Bolshevik army pushing them into the Arctic Ocean. In early 1919, there were rumors and actual mutinies in the Allied ranks. President Wilson directed his War Department on February 16, 1919, to begin planning the return of the North Russian Expeditionary Force from Russia. In March 1919, 4 American soldiers from Company B, 339th Infantry, drew up a petition protesting their continued presence in Russia and were threatened with court-martial proceedings. U.S. Army Brigadier General Wiles P. Richardson arrived in the town of Archangel aboard an icebreaker on April 17, 1919, with orders from General Pershing to organize and coordinate a withdrawal of American troops at the earliest possible moment. On May 26, 1919, the first half of 8,000 volunteer members of the British North Russian Relief Force arrived in Archangel to relieve American troops. In early June, the rest of the Americans left North Russia to sail for Brest, France, and then to New York City, and then home. 2/3 of the polar bears were from the state of Michigan. During the withdrawal, the men of the American Expeditionary Force in North Russia decided to call themselves the Polar Bears and were authorized to wear the polar bear insignia on their left sleeve. During their time in North Russia, the American force suffered more than 210 casualties, at least 110 from battle, 30 missing in action, and 70 from disease. 90% of those were caused by the Spanish flu. On July 3, 1919, approximately half of the 339th Infantry Regiment arrived at Detroit's Michigan Central Rail Station. On July 4th, the citizens of Detroit gave the boys of the 339th Infantry Regiment an elaborate welcome on Belle Isle. When the troops approached the ferry, the island was already teeming with thousands of people, and 100 rockets were launched. The welcoming committee distributed white polar bear armbands to every soldier, which they wore proudly. Girls dressed in white Red Cross uniforms lined the pier and tossed flowers as the men disembarked and marched to the athletic field, where friends and family were waiting for them. They paraded down Central Avenue. The parade ended at the Belle Isle Casino, where their commanding officer, Major Brooks Nichols, was given an award. The men were then dismissed so they could rejoin their families and partake in the lunch that had been prepared by the ladies of the American Red Cross. At 2 p.m., the soldiers regrouped at the casino for an address by U.S. Senator Hiram Johnson of California, a vocal critic of President Wilson's decision to send U.S. troops to Russia. In February of 1919, he made several highly publicized speeches in the Senate calling for their speedy return. Following the speech, Major Nichols told the men they could return to their company tents and enjoy themselves, as long as they were back at the Michigan Central Station by 8 a.m. the next day to board the trains for Camp Custer, where they would be discharged from military service. In 1920, the American North Russian Expeditionary Force veterans organized the Polar Bear Association, and on Memorial Day 1930, they dedicated the Polar Bear Monument at the Whitechapel Cemetery in Troy, Michigan, where the remains of many of the polar bears who fell in Russia were buried. Today, the Polar Bear Memorial Association conducts a service open to the public every Memorial Day at 11 a.m. at the monument.